Hello. Right, so I'm just going through my palette to see what's salvageable here. Haven't painted in a few days, maybe almost a week, so some of these paints are a little dried out. I already cleaned out all of the paints that are on the cool part of my palette, and that's feeling pretty dry. Sometimes I can get away with just peeling off the skin that's dried on the paint. A while back, I had my palette set up so I had a cover on it, and then I would put capfuls of clove oil, and that would keep my paints wet. These are oil paints. Keep them wet for maybe even 2 weeks sometimes without even getting a skin on them. So I think I need to get back to doing that. I had a nice piece of plexiglass that fit right on top, and that started to crack. I guess I abused it too much and it rebelled. And so in the end I had to throw that out. So I haven't been putting clove oil on my palette for about half a year now. Needless to say, my paints are drying up on my palette much faster. This orange looks like it's not really salvageable either. Working my way through, and I'm going to be putting fresh paints out. I'll talk about the different colors that I have. So this is my black, and I don't know if you can see that in the picture, but just putting a little bit of black down. And I use chromatic black. That's a Gamblin artist color. Artist color just means it's the top quality color that Gamblin makes. That's their designation. Some swear by not having black in their palette, and sometimes I just want things to be black, and black is the best of being black. So even if you use it in color mixing, black has certain properties that you can't get with any other color. Especially if you want to make a darker version of that color without losing so much intensity, sometimes black does the trick. The one drawback that I find with any black, either if it's a chromatic black, which is a complementary color mix black that has quinacridone red and phthalo emerald in it instead of using a traditional black. Whatever black you use, when you're mixing warmer colors, it does tend to lean towards green. So it has a cooling effect, I guess you would say. I'm going to put out some of my dioxazine purple. This is a very intense color, and maybe I shouldn't have put out quite so much because a little goes a long way, and that'll probably dry up before I use it all. Okay, I already have a little bit of alizarin permanent. That is what I use for like lips and dark areas of lips, the separation between the lips. Sometimes in a nostril I'll use alizarin crimson to get that nice dark deep red color. I'm going to put down some naphtha red. This is my warm red. It's semi-transparent. And in between that, I have my quinacridone red. Last year I was doing a painting, and this girl had a pink sweater on. I started mixing white with my naphtha red that was not getting the intensity of red that I wanted. The more white that I added, naturally the duller the color gets, but the naphtha red wasn't intense enough. I needed the quinacridone red. When you mix it with white, it has a very high, what's called tinting strength. And all tinting strength means is that the ability to hold on to its color when you're adding white with it. This has a remarkable tinting strength. Both the quinacridone red and the quinacridone magenta are beautiful colors. They are nice and rich. They're highly transparent. They can be used as a wash or as what's called a mass tone, where you use it thickly. But because it's transparent, if you use it as a mass tone, it will start to get dark and dull if you use it in a thick way without mixing it with an opaque color. Next, I need some of my orange. It's permanent orange. This one's a little bit beat up. And that's just a nice, like, right down the middle of the road orange. And again, this is a semi-transparent color next to my naphtha red. They both have very similar qualities in terms of their transparency and how they mix with other colors. So this side of my palette tends to be semi-transparent towards opaque. This is where most people spend a lot of money on their cadmium colors. They're very expensive, cadmium colors. People think that they are extremely intense colors, and cadmium colors are not intense, especially in color mixing. They tend to dull up rather quickly. I use, instead of cadmium red, orange, and yellow, I use Naphthol red, permanent orange, and Hansa yellow light. Sometimes I use Hansa yellow medium, but the yellow light gives me this nice, fresh, light yellow. It's a little bit greeny for my taste, but if I wanted to lean more orange or warmer, then I can just add a touch of any of my reds or oranges to it, and that'll do the trick. Right here I have my 3 semi-transparent colors on the warm side of my palette, and each one of these, if you get a 150 milliliter tube, is about $25. If you were to get cadmium red, cadmium orange, or cadmium yellow, you would be spending about $40, $45 or even more for each one of those tubes. So it's more than double the price. The colors that I'm using here have a much higher tinting strength than you would get out of any of the cadmium colors. It's a misconception. I think it's because the Impressionists used those colors. They were the most intense colors available at the time, but modern science has brought us even more intense colors that are less expensive. They're used in the automotive industry. So they're cheap and highly abundant and ready for paint makers to mix them into their colors, and they do a marvelous job. They're light, fast, and they mix really well with other colors. One drawback, however, is that they are very strong, and if you have trouble controlling the colors in your painting, you have to know how to dull them down quite a bit to get them to work properly. Otherwise, you are going to have trouble harmonizing your painting, or you're going to get so intense in your flesh tones that it's going to look strange. So you have to be able to either know how to mix complementary colors into them, or spread out your color mixture, amount of different colors you're putting into your mixer so it dulls them down. Or you can add black and white together, a gray, mix it into the color to gray it down. So there's several different approaches to neutralizing your color, and I use all of them while I'm painting. So let me fill out the rest of the palette here as I go. So what I need left is to put my blues in and my greens. Just want to put about as much as I'll use in this painting. There's a little bit of blue in her hat, so I see that I just want a little bit. I don't really want to waste paints here, and if they dry on my palette, then I end up throwing a fair amount of paint out. Want to keep them fresh by just putting out a little bit and then maybe doing more painting in the next day or two so I can use a little bit more of it. Okay, so this is my phthalo blue, and just a little bit of that. I can always put more as I'm working, so it's better not to put out too much paint. But at the same time, you don't want to be starved of a color. I mean, often I'll work and I'll really need a color, and I'll work around the fact that I need that color, and finally I'll have to stop and put more color on my palette. But in the meantime, it's affected my color mixing because I didn't have the color I needed, or enough of it when I needed it. Okay, so that's my phthalo emeralds. It's a beautiful color, and a lot of people use that phthalo green, but I find that to have too much yellow in it for my taste. That phthalo emerald's just where I want it to be in the palette, because I can always add more yellow to that. With the color mixtures I have here, the color selection, because everything has such a high tinting strength, I can mix just about any color that I need. It is a little bit more of a workout if you need something that's closer to an earth tone. It requires a lot more color mixing, but I just don't want to have so many colors out on my palette. I would rather just mix them and pull from a muddied mixture of color when I need something that has more of an earth tone to it. So I'll just work like that. And plus you get a little more richness than if you have like a burnt sienna or burnt umber on your palette, or a yellow ochre. If you can start with the most intense color and gray it down as you go, then you are getting a little bit more of that stronger color intensity. And again, it's all about trying to control those color intensities as you go. And the real trick too is having a handle on your value structure, which is how light or dark something is despite the color that you're putting out. So what I was going to say about the ultramarine blue, the phthalo blue, and the phthalo emerald is those are all also transparent colors. So what I have here is half of my palette is completely transparent color all the way through from this black, the green through the purples, and this very cool red. And then I have these semi-transparent colors, and some would say, well, you only have the warm ones. Well, if I mix white with any of these other colors, with the cool colors, then those essentially become semi-transparent. In fact, why don't I just do a little bit of that right here so that you can see I can pre-mix a little bit of my colors here. So when I do that with the palette knife, I'm just going to get a little dab of white in front of each one. And see, the excitement starts, doesn't it? Okay, so I'm just going to get just a very little bit of purple, because you remember this dioxazine purple, it's super strong. Okay, so here's my semi-transparent purple. See how beautiful that is? Okay. Let's get my... So this alizarin permanent, it's supposed to be like an alizarin crimson. It doesn't have the tinting strength of some of these other colors, so it does gray down a little bit when you mix it with white, but that's okay. You can see how strong this quinacridone red is and how beautiful a pink it makes. You can see how strong. That is such a strong, vibrant color. It's really beautiful. And that's, the one reason why I got it is because I really wanted to get those hot pinks at times in my painting, and especially if it's in something like a garment of clothing. And I can throw it into a cheek or something where I just want a little bit more pinkness, or sometimes in the lips to kind of pull that out. And here's my ultramarine blue. Let's get a little bit of more blue in there so you can see the color. And this is great for if you're painting a sky. And a lot of times the sky will be grayish and sometimes a little bit greener towards the horizon. And then as you go higher in the sky and it gets a little bit deeper, then it starts to shift towards purple. I like to have a combination of the ultramarine blue and the phthalo blue when I'm painting skies. So if you can imagine, this is a horizon line and then it goes up deeper into the painting. And so then the last one of these is the phthalo emerald, and that really makes a nice, beautiful, cool green there. And then if I wanted to, and I needed something more like an olivey color, then I can take a little bit of this and mix it with yellow, and then I can get more like a grassy kind of green. So this gives me this full range now I have of these semi-transparent colors in more of a lighter value. So if you can imagine, so this one, just going to add a little bit of white to that so you can see it, how it looks tinted. Some of the white from over here. Oops, there we go. So, but you can see it's not quite as vibrant a pink as if you really needed to go pink, and this ends up being maybe a little bit too warm, and you try to throw some alizarin permanent in there, you could see how it would get kind of dull on you. This orange too is not going to be quite as bright as that quinacridone red, but it holds up pretty well. So this is a nice spunky light orange. And then the yellow. So yellow I'm still working on getting the hang of. I tend to not put enough yellow in my flesh tones, and it's partially because I have a hard time controlling the yellow. So like I'll put a little bit of yellow in, and it will be so intense, and then I'll have to knock it down again, and then I just end up just leaning towards lightening everything up with white. And what I really need to do is tint the yellow first, get a lot of white in it, so I have something that's a lot easier to control, so that it's more like a Naples yellow, that's a very light yellow that's easy to mix into the flesh tones. So that's my full palette. It's all set up. So in terms of mediums, I have a cup of safflower oil, not the kind you cook with. This is also from Gamblin. It's been refined to use for oil paintings. Gamblin also uses it in the binders of some of their cooler colors because unlike linseed oil, it doesn't yellow as much with age, and it doesn't have a yellow cast to it. And so it's really good for those like radiant colors that Gamblin mixes. The idea is to keep the colors very cool. It's the same as the binder in half the paints that I'm using. So it makes a good painting medium, and usually I use it to thin out the paint, and plus it also works to extend the drying time. Here, what I use, it's a little bit off the palette, but it's a can filled with Gamsol, which is an odorless mineral spirit. And I use that to also thin the paint and to clean my brushes at the same time. So I'll go through this pattern where I'll paint, I'll put a little bit of Gamsol on the brush, I'll thin out some of my paint mixture, and then I'll paint something, and then I will keep on mixing with that same brush unless I really need to paint a completely different color. And then I'll go ahead and wash the brush, I'll wipe it off, clean again, and then I'll start the process all over again. And the real difference between thinning with Gamsol and thinning with the safflower oil is the Gamsol will shorten the drying time. It's designed just to evaporate, and so eventually there'll be nothing left in the paint, whereas the safflower oil will just extend the paint. It's just adding more oil to the paint, so you're creating a little bit more transparent version where the paint itself is suspended in more oil, and eventually that oil will not evaporate, but it will harden over time. And so oils really don't dry per se, they harden from oxidation, and they become part of a permanent film that's on your painting. That's how they work, whereas the Gamsol, you're painting, and what's happening is that the mineral spirit is just evaporating right out of your paint and leaving a thickened mixture of the paint. And if you go too thin, then you're not really creating a paint film, you're creating a wash, and that won't quite have the durability and the strength that you would have as if you had been thinning with oils all along. I use those different choices at different times and depending on what I want to achieve.